Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, June 6th, 2025, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research 2 channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, well, I got an interesting video for you here. We're going to talk about the Newark earthworks, and this recent article by the Smithsonian just came out about essentially about how they've acquired private property that has the Newark, a portion of the Newark earthworks on it. After 100 years, it was a golf course, a country club, whatever it was, where a bulk of this Newark earthwork was and untouched as well. So they bought the property or something like that. So that's what I wanted to see what the hubbub was about in this article from the Smithsonian. And again, and I've said it many times on my channel that these people have some sort of apophenia or pareidolia, something like that. They see patterns and things, and I hate to say it, where I'm highly suspicious of this is because this is where mainstream and the alternative meet. Whereas the alternative are constantly complaining about how the mainstream have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to evaluating the past. Okay? In this regard, they're on the same page. Okay? So every time any sort of earthworks or constructions or ancient construction, whatever it is, they're always, since the Egyptian pyramids and Orion, all these things, okay, which seem all very interesting, but there's no proof of these things, okay? They're drawing these conclusions from patterns that they see, patterns that may not be there, okay? All right? Seeing patterns where there are none, right? And I hate to say it, people like even Jim Vieira, he's all down with how the Newark earthworks are this, you know, metatonic clock and all kind of stuff because of the octagon and whatnot. And I don't see it that way. I'm sorry. I think these people just every time something was talked about, even my friend Jimmy, the Paleo Mountain Man, at the beginning, but after a while, he saw it wasn't making sense to him. He's starting to get it a little bit, but the constant association of anything that might have been built in the past with some sort of astronomical significance, okay, seems kind of ridiculous to me because it often seems like, it's just not quite right on the money. So we'll talk about it more, but I don't believe it. I want to assess this from the point of view or perception of somebody who studied, you know, drafting, engineering, architecture for 4 years. Then I went on to electronic drafting, which more or less reads like a flow chart, kind of, among other things, just drawing out circuit boards and all kind of stuff. So understanding how these things will relate to each other and values and all kind of stuff. So in any case, you spent a lot of years studying that stuff. And similar to the professor of architecture from the University of Texas, whose hobby it was to study Rio back ruins, came to some conclusion that it didn't make sense to him that the Mayans would be involved in the construction of any of these things, and it seemed like these things have been destroyed and rebuilt, at some later date, repaired and rebuilt. So, you know, he, and they understood, he understood what Mayan architecture consisted of, this sort of, mortar and rubble type construction, whereas, concrete is an advance in building techniques. It still doesn't match finely cut, precision cut stone structures. They're just absolutely beautiful and intricate and did not relate at all to the majority of what they would consider Mayan construction. So in any case, they didn't like that. So they, anthropologists and archaeologists don't like when another discipline somehow, horns in on their own evaluations and are ready to dismiss it. They're ready to dismiss people within their own discipline. So somebody outside of the discipline is surely not going to take seriously. So in any case, if anybody's been paying attention to my videos on this channel and my original channel, you know, I do not think these things have anything to do with the astronomical observations or, you know, first of all, these astronomical observations, like, they say it's for like, when to plant crops and all kind of stuff. Oh, look. So I went over this on his channel. Growing something from a seed is like a no-brainer. Children can understand it readily without any further elaboration or anything like that. Okay? You don't need the stars to tell you when to plant and how seeds grow and all that kind of stuff. Simple observation can tell you everything you have to know. There's no need to look at the skies or anything like that. Okay? Whether these things herald certain seasons and has something to do. See, and here is where I have a problem with this too, is that, they always, this is what it makes the native peoples or the indigenous people or the ancient people seem like a bunch of superstitious fools. Okay? This obsession with, you know, uh, spirituality, all that religion and all kind of stuff seems, a complete obsession. I mean, we have religion today. How many people are obsessed with it to a point that it occupies every aspect of their life, especially in complex societies? If anybody knows about the history of Rome, in the late Roman Empire, okay, they didn't believe in the gods anymore. They thought that was an old archaic idea. None of the Roman upper class believed in any of that stuff. Is they did things out of ritual there and anything, but nobody believed in the gods and everything. In a complex society, they were mostly concerned with what they had been doing all along. Trade and commerce and trade and commerce and trade and commerce. We're constantly talking about the indigenous people in the Americas with trade, not religious ceremonies. See, this is where it relegates all these native peoples, and this is my own feeling about it. All right, and it seems to me that the people who support the native peoples don't really understand how native peoples feel. Now, somebody like Gail Highpine, who I respect highly, who's a journalist and author for Ayahuasca magazine, who's a native person. You can tell by her name that she is, okay, and done extensive writing in all sorts of publications, okay, about native peoples, and is a believe a doctorate in native studies. So I read uh, from her an article that she wrote about what her belief was. Okay, so I think a lot of people who think they support the native peoples here in the Americas here, okay, think that they're supporting them when they don't understand them at all. Many of these people still believe in the Bering Strait land crossing, which is no longer true according to the Smithsonian. It can't be. Okay, so that's out the window and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what these people believe, but people like Gail High Pine, who is an indigenous person, believes that she didn't get her DNA from some mixed race that crossed over the Bering Land Bridge. She believed that her people came from this soil, this earth, this place, and that those people came later and added their DNA, but they were here already. Okay, so that's what native people, real native people, believe. Okay, are you supporting them with your dumb ideas about the Bering Strait land crossing and all of what The Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian has evaluated. Even Charles C. Mann. I like to show you the pages when I do these things, but I've had some sort of JavaScript error, so I can't show you. I read you from on my other channel from Charles C. Mann's book, 1491 Revelations in the Americas Before the Arrival of Columbus, that first of all, what the text, as far as he was concerned, after doing all his research and writing his books about this subject, that the compensatory education across the board, what was taught in schools about the native people seemed ridiculous to him, seemed stupid. All right, from his best-selling books there on native peoples here in the Americas and what he found out by interviewing lots of archaeologists and anthropologists. Okay, again, you can't have 30,000-year-old organized societies in South America and have some sort of cockamamie crossing there 11,000 years ago that Alice Herdliska, the ghoul, the necrophile, and freakazoid who either Charles C. Mann or C.W. Serrano said archaeology back some 40 years or something like that. So we're dealing with that. He taught everything that everybody knows so far because he was a father of anthropology and he didn't know what he was talking about. He never was able to confirm his theory at all by studying it. All he did was, want to confirm the theory that Europeans were more evolved than everybody else on Earth. But just look at all their weird skulls that he cut off the heads of everybody from. So, and also said, hey, there's no such thing as giants, only robust individuals. Yeah, like this guy right here next to an average person. Yeah, I don't think so. That's not slightly more robust. That's significantly larger for people who are in the same species. Don't think it's happening. So, in any case, let me read to you from this article because there's a couple other things about the Hopewell and Adena that they don't mention it here. They don't want to mention the Adena at all, even though the Hopewell culture supposedly took everything from the Adena culture, not a mention of it at all. They built mounds. Well, if the Adena, according to them, were their predecessor, well, they built all the original mounds. No mention of it here. Okay, so let's hear about what they're going to say about it. And I don't care about, like, that's great that, they got all of the property there and everybody can go see the complete earthwork there that's left that hasn't been bulldozed and destroyed by, wonderful us. But let's read a little bit about this. We won't go into the acquiring of the golf, park there and golf course there and country club. They don't, not important, but it's all good, I guess. Okay, an Ohio earthquake where thousands once gathered for celestial observations and religious ceremonies open to the public. Well, first of all, there's absolutely no proof of any of that. They're drawing these conclusions on their own with no evidence to back them up. Okay, so it's a hypothesis. It's not reading right. An Ohio earthquake where thousands may have gathered for celestial observations or religious ceremonies open to the public. Okay, they don't know that for a fact. I'm sorry. An earthen enclosure called the Octagon is drawing much deserved attention to the state's history filled mounds built some 2,000 years ago by the Hopewell culture. No mention of the Adena. The Newark earthworks in Ohio consist of three sections of preserved earthworks: the Great Circle earthworks, the Octagon earthworks, and the Wright earthworks. For more than 100 years, golfers at the Mound Builders Country Club in Newark, Ohio, teed off in the shadow of one of the world's premier indigenous treasures, the Octagon, an earthwork consisting of a 20-acre circle and 50-acre eight-sided expanse. The 2,000-year-old site once brought thousands of indigenous Americans together. Centuries later, when European settlers arrived in central Ohio, they only vaguely understood the importance of the more than 10,000 earthworks in the region, before largely sacrificing them at the expense of industrialization and growth. Some sites remain protected by federal statutes, and others remain largely hidden from public view. But on the 1st of January, after protracted legal battle, this section of the larger Hopewell ceremonial earthworks, a newly christened UNESCO World Heritage Site, reemerged to the public after being part of a private country club for a century, and Native Americans rejoiced at connecting with a piece of their past. While the site is Spartan now, besides the impressive octagon itself, plans are in the works for an interpretive center and upgrades. Oh boy, I wonder what those things are going to be. Interpretive center. See, it has to be interpreted because they don't know. See? But you got to go along with their story, right? With all their training from Alice Hurdliska, a guy who didn't know what he was talking about at all and was a cuckoo. All right? What it took to build the Hopewell Mounds. Oh boy, this is a good one. The Hopewell ceremonial earthworks are collectively made up of 8 mound sites scattered throughout central Ohio and named after the native community who lived in Ohio before the arrival of European settlers. Some of the sites, like the Octagon, are enclosures or walls leaving a courtyard type space in the middle, while others are mounds, and they are not small. The Great Circle, also in Newark, has a diameter of nearly 1,200 feet and a circumference of more than 3,700 feet. Its walls rise as high as 13 feet, which ain't that high, especially, when you look at it, it's very gradual incline up and incline down. Okay, so not much security there, but to define an area, sure, and keep it enclosed somewhat. They were intentionally created to last a long time, says Jennifer Altman, Chief Historic Sites Officer for Ohio History Connection of the Earth's walls. Everything, she says, was fashioned with care and deliberation. The Hopewell were incredible soil engineers. And so here's this terra preta that she's talking about that these people were capable of doing here and in South America and all around the Americas. Okay, they were engineering soils. That's very interesting to me how they engineered these things and knew how to. The mounds were likely constructed over hundreds of years, culminating around 300 BC. How long they took to build, archaeologists believe, depended on many variables, like how many people pitched in and whether the work was year round or seasonal. But the soil used was strategic. The insides of the mounds display a yellowish clay and the outside a brownish clay. These were possibly important colors, Altman says. These soils would have been deliberately brought in from another area. It wasn't haphazard. It was a very intentional, symbolic color. Well, here's where she's going off the deep end here and making her own suppositions, interpreting it for herself without any formal training as an architect or an engineer or anybody to work with masonry or anything like that. Okay, because it probably isn't has anything to do with symbology at all, but it has more to do with identifying a material that needs to put in a certain layer of the mound. Okay, one material is one color, another material is another color. not to mix them up, because if they weren't and they mixed them up and they were close to being the same color, well, that would be a problem then as to knowing exactly where to put it in the mound, in the layer of the mound. See, that makes more sense to me than some kind of cockamamie symbolic thing that's going on there. I highly doubt it. Sorry, wrong interpretation there. Archaeologists unearthed artifacts at Hopewell sites in Newark during the dates in the mid 1800s to the early 1910s. But since the sites came under the stewardship of Ohio History Connection in the 1930s, only two limited surgical excavations meant more to understand structure than to unearth artifacts occurred in 1992 and 1994. Limited for some reason because they don't want to upset the native peoples and their hatred of the whites and all kind of stuff like that. 'Cause that's all I can see that it is. Okay, you don't want people in the world to know the history of this planet and all kind of things that happened in the far ancient past. Why would you not want that? Okay, you could do it yourself under your own supervision. Okay, but many of these native archaeologists have gone to mainstream universities. They learned all of Alice Herdlich's bullshit, right? Now they're going to interpret everything through this lens of, you know, they're superstitious people in the past and not these super advanced people who live in a very complex society. They say it themselves that they're starting to see that the society, Adina and Hopewell society, was far more complex than they could have imagined. Okay, that's their words, not mine. Okay, but if that's the case and they were highly complex, we can say the Roman civilization or whatever. Like I said, in the late Roman period, nobody believed in the gods and all that. They weren't traveling distances to attend things, whatever, unless there was a party there going on. But these are not what these things are used for. It's clear. I mean, they're sort of bifurcated on what they think about it because talk about that later. We have found beautifully crafted ceremonial regalia made from raw materials that are special. Okay, so whatever they found has to be ceremonial now, doesn't it? Has to be. They don't know what the ceremonies that these people had. They have no clue whatsoever. But hey, this stuff they found, it's got to be ceremonial. Must. Okay. It's made from raw materials that are special, says Brad Lepper, senior archaeologist for Ohio History Connections World Heritage Program. Lepper says those unusual raw materials include conch shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from southern Canada, and obsidian from Obsidian Cliff in Yellowstone Park, illustrating the extent of the Hopewell culture's influence. So, where are they doing this manufacturing? Okay, so raw materials. Okay, so they bringing raw materials. Is just are they bringing a couple of shells? You think if they're traveling like 1,000 miles to somewhere, they just came with like a bag full of them or something like that in this huge arena where they're going to be at and everything. Uh, don't think so. So the Hopewell culture's influence spread far and wide. Yeah, it sure did. It was the center of a far-flung interaction sphere, Lepper says, describing the indigenous pilgrims who would arrive at Newark from far away to experience the northernmost moonrise every 18.6 years. Those spiritual occasions likely drew thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of religious pilgrims. While today's scientists can only speculate, Lepper notes the size of the mounds and enclosures. The Hopewell earthworks are huge. They cannot be intended to serve a local congregation. Therefore, I infer that people were coming to these earthworks from the literal ends of their world, Lepper says, noting the Atlantic coast and Rocky Mountains. He says they brought with them offerings of special items from their homelands. Okay, they participated in building the giant earthworks and later came to worship there, particularly on special days, such as the northernmost moonrise, which was built into the architecture of the earthworks, Lepper says. Okay, it was, huh? Okay. For comparison, the gathering of Civil War veterans was held at the Great Circle during the 1870s, and 15,000 to 20,000 people crowded in to hear speeches and celebrate. Lepper says that is our only historical reference to how many people might fit inside the circle. The octagon, at 2.5 times larger, could theoretically accommodate 75,000 within its walls. The gatherings, which peaked around 300 CE, would have had all the trappings of a large festival, like an indigenous Woodstock with celestial observations and religious ceremonies in place of musical performances. Which I find this statement to be ridiculous, okay? There's no basis for this whatsoever, except based on the what Charles C. Mann would consider the ridiculous, you know, information to be gotten from a public education about the indigenous peoples, okay? And I read to you from mainstream articles here. They know all about raw materials being imported into these areas, into fashioned into crafts and goods, useful goods, and probably decorative goods and jewelry and all kinds of stuff, okay? So they manufactured, they weren't bringing offerings. Okay, maybe they bought offerings there for some sort of religious ceremony. Okay, but how many religious ceremonies are you having in something that you just built? Like, let's say the Meadowlands here. Okay, it just strikes me as so similar to the Newark earthworks the way it is. I can't seem to get, because my JavaScript crapped out. I can't seem to pull up these. Oh, there we go. I got it back. Oh, so here's the image of the Meadowlands. So it's so similar to me as the Ohio earthworks, right? Because, like, you know, at one part of the earthworks here, you have this other area over here, and this other area over here, which is built similarly to this square one, which we see repeated over and over again, and especially in the Squire and Davis illustrations from many, many different areas, like even the Paint Creek areas too, and just similar type structures, okay? Some of them a little different, like these ones at Newark, okay? So, but it's so similar to me to the Meadowlands here, all right? That, okay, so what do you got going on in the Meadowlands over here? Okay, so you got football over here with, maybe a concert every once in a while. I saw a concert there in 1977. Okay, Ted Nugent, Mahogany Rush, Journey, and Aerosmith there in 1977. So I saw that there, and then it's it's also used for big events. Maybe like Joel Osteen. I mean, Joel Osteen might come there and do his ministry in a stadium there or something like that. How many times Joel Osteen going to do that? Right? Maybe once in a while and everything, but it's primarily built for football. That's his primary use. Okay? Maybe a religious ceremony every once in a while, and then right over here you got a racetrack. Okay? So, whereas here in the Ohio Earthworks, okay, you can see by these roads that connect these areas here that major things were going on, right, between these areas here, okay? This one's a little bit more elaborate square than some of the other squares that we've seen. A little bit different, okay? And this expanded one over here, okay? So they're doing horse racing over here and they're doing football over here. What don't you understand about that? Okay, because they're obviously doing different things here. Why would you have these two areas separated like this and have similar type construction? That's all that this is. This is not an octagon in the true octagon sense. It's broken up into 8 different areas. It's not a true octagon. Okay, but you know they see a metatonic clock there with the phases of the moon. So let's see what this article says about that. These Hopewell earthworks were the center of a continental religious movement, Lepper says. No evidence for that. According to the archaeologists, the octagon served as sort of celestial calendar marking the northernmost limits of the rising of the moon during an 18.6-year cycle. The Hopewell likely equated spiritual significance to these moon movements that align precisely with the octagon. Again, making these people out to be superstitious fools that are just frightened by their gods and everything and all this kind of stuff like that. And I highly doubt it in a far, far more complex organized trading and commerce society, okay? Let's see what it says at the end of this article here because this is all about the story about acquiring the property and all this kind of stuff, and we don't need to really know about that. But let's see what it says at the end of this here. Okay. On January 1st, over 800 people arrived for the public opening of the Octagon. Hundreds of people braved Ohio's snowy winter to experience the earthwork. Clouds obscured the moon's northernmost moonrise this March, but this fall promises some dramatic evening and nighttime moonrises. The moon spends several months near its northernmost point in a position so close to the alignment, not in alignment with it, it's so close that, hey, uh, it's almost there, but not quite. Because they're gonna say because it moved and there was this moved and this and that and the other thing and all kind of stuff. Well, maybe it did or whatever it is. You know, what does it have to do with anything? It's not aligned with the moonrise there. It's off. Okay, in a position so close to the alignment octagon that the average viewer doesn't see the difference. So that's good. Ohio History Connection held a special invitation only nighttime viewing in October when the property was still part of the country club. The moonrise on this chilly night was breathtaking, says Thompson, who was one of about 100 people present for the event. It was a true shared experience among those in attendance, but the most extraordinary part was knowing that this similar experience had been shared by people in the same place 2,000 years ago. Maybe, but that's not what they were primarily there for. They were primarily there for commerce and trade, the manufacturing of good. Yeah, maybe it was a festival. It was a festival every day. These people, everyday lives. Yeah, there's probably eateries and vendors along all these avenues and everything, selling their wares and goods and everything. These manufactured goods, and there's some kind of monetary system going on besides the fact of the Adena tablets, which they still haven't figured out. I have yet to read a scholarly article about it. I'm planning to, or there is one. Okay, it seems to be some sort of hieroglyphs. This one right here, a new typological ordering of the Adena tablets based on a deeper reading of the Mackenzie tablet. Okay, these people were far more complex. These Adena people. Okay, and this could have been an impossible form of writing. They say these hieroglyphs, some of them are symmetrical, some of them aren't. Seem to be telling some sort of other kind of story, but like this one down here. All right, so many people have mentioned before, including C.W. Sharam, and I think Charles C. Mann too, that nobody's bothered to figure these things out yet. They're still working on it. There's more research needs to be done, but at their pace, forget about it. All right, it's never going to get done. They need that research money real bad. So I have also gone over there. I did it recently on my channel about this is when Jenna came out about the giants in West Virginia there, which they find Adena mounds in West Virginia. They do. And some of these tablets were dug up in Virginia, I believe, West Virginia, from mounds in West Virginia. So I went over how I had read repeatedly, and I was reading one of the articles one of the newspaper articles, and also done under university supervision and archaeological digs way back in the 1920s, I believe it was, all right, where they dug the remains up, which seemed to be rather large, okay, and they had coins with them, large copper and brass coins. All right, so that to me is an indication of a more complex society with more complex version of commerce going on there other than trading, okay, above and beyond that. Far, far